So before I go ahead and start writing like a Python script to create a database or a Python program that connects to our Postgres database, I want to talk about a virtual environment. Has anybody heard of a virtual environment before in Python or in any in the context of anything before?
Like a VM?
Like a virtual environment.
Yeah.
You know, what is a virtual environment in the context of how you're thinking about it? Because it does kind of relate.
For a VM, it's like it's just like a simulation of a computer itself, where I guess in the context that I know, if it is altered with or destroyed in some specific way, like let's say it's like a VM for like Windows XP and it's syskeyed. If you restart it, it's not syskeyed anymore because it's back to whatever state you start the VM at.
So if you destroy the so say on your local machine, you have a virtual environment of like Windows inside of there.
Right.
And then if you destroy that virtual environment and come back, it's to like the default Windows.
The default state that it was when it was first initialized, I think.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
No, that makes sense. So a virtual environment in the context of Python is, think of your house or like inside your house, you have, a bunch of rooms or whatever. And then inside of one of the rooms, you have like a gaming room. And like inside that gaming room is like anything goes, like you can play games, it's a workshop or whatever. And inside that game room is like a virtual environment. So like, I don't know, that's a really bad example. What is it? Oh, so has anybody heard like the movie Bubble Boy? Like where a person's like stuck in a bubble, their immune system can't is compromised to the outside world. So they have to live inside of a bubble. So elements from the outside world, he can't get touched by elements from the outside world or else he'll get sick. That's kind of what like the virtual environment from a Python perspective is. So in Python, on your local machine, you know how we've installed a bunch of like pip install green, like that's like it's already satisfied. I already have it on my local machine. So I've already installed a bunch of packages on my local machine. But if I wanted to write an application where I didn't want any of these packages to conflict with my application at all, I can set up a virtual environment on my local machine, which, it's like, create a Python application or create a virtual environment, and I can install anything in that virtual environment, and it won't conflict with anything else that's already installed on my machine. So inside that local environment, I can install all kinds of packages and everything. And then when I exit out of that virtual environment, those packages that I installed in the virtual environment won't affect anything on my local machine. So it's like a little designated space on my local machine that I can install packages on, I can create an application, and it won't affect the outside world or anything else within my local machine. Likewise, or inversely, all the packages that I have installed on my local machine won't conflict with my virtual environment or any of the packages that I have installed on my virtual environment. What questions do you have about virtual environments? And this will make a lot more sense once we actually get into Django. But for this example, I don't need to create a virtual environment just because it's not what I'm creating isn't that complex. But I'm going to go ahead and create a virtual environment just to show you what a virtual environment looks like. So in order for me to create a virtual environment in Python on my local machine, I can do Python M, which I think stands for make. VENV stands for virtual environment, and whatever I want to call that virtual environment. So I can say like SQL example. And I click that. I might throw an error because of this part, but nope. So nothing really bad happened. So I created in virtual environment, but I'm not currently in my virtual environment. So in order for me to go in my virtual environment, I can do source. I think it's source, VENV. No, it's source, SQL example, bin, activate. So I'm saying, hey, source, the name of my virtual environment, bin, activate. And notice how right now I've got SQL example over here in my editor or in my terminal. That means I'm currently in my virtual environment called SQL example. I want to see something real quick. List all packages on machine Python. So I just want to see all the packages. Pip freeze, no, that's not what I want. So pip list. Deactivate. So that's how I get into my virtual environment. In order to get out of it, I can just say deactivate. So now I'm no longer in my virtual environment. So if I wanted to see all of the packages installed on my Python packages installed, these are all of the Python packages that I've installed on my entire local machine. But if I clear the screen and I go into my virtual environment, and I pip list, I literally don't have anything really installed from a packages perspective. So all these packages that are on my local machine aren't installed in my virtual environment. So none of these packages, if they were compromised or anything, they won't affect anything within my virtual environment right here. What questions do you have about virtual environments?
Do you want to start a new virtual environment for every program you build or every app you build or something?
So every Django app, it's good practice to create a virtual environment. Yes. But now this virtual environment is strictly for Python. It's not for Node. It's not for, I'm sure other languages and frameworks have virtual environments, but you don't need to create a virtual environment for Node or anything like that, or React. So this is strictly for Python. And it is good practice to create a virtual environment for every new Django application you build. I don't necessarily need one to do what I'm going to be doing in the lecture. I just kind of want to introduce a virtual environment before we really start to dive into Django a little bit later.
Are we trying to use a virtual environment to protect something?
Yes, so we want to insulate our application from any other types of packages that might conflict, or even versions of packages. It's mainly used for versions. So say you have two applications and there isn't a virtual environment in those, and you have one package that has, say, a version of, I don't know, like Django, or like a Docker application or a Docker version in one application with a different version than another application has a Docker version of a different version. So two different applications require different versions of a package. If you didn't have a virtual environment, those two applications would always be utilizing the same version. And that's not necessarily always good, because say like you built an application 5 years ago and that used an older version of like some package, And if you were to upgrade that version to like the latest version, it would break your application. So you'd have to do a lot of modification to your application and update it a lot. Whereas if it was inside a virtual environment, you can stay with that same version pretty much until the end of time. And then if you created another application with a different version, it's just so versions don't conflict with one another. So that's, you're kind of protecting your application. Yep.
So Tom, so does that mean that we never update any packages we installed in one certain virtual environment? And we
No,
always...
you can definitely update them, but you just have to ensure that the update won't break your application. Like a lot of websites out there, applications like Groupon or whatever, are using like older versions of Python, older versions of Ruby on Rails. So, and if they were to update to like a newer version of Rails or Django, it might break their application because certain features of those frameworks or packages might be deprecated. But so you just like when you are ready to update a new package, you just kind of have to make sure that your application is still working and nothing breaks.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yep. And it's like really important if you have like a really widely used like application that you better make sure that when you update update a package or update a module, that it doesn't break everything, because it can break the entire application. What other questions you have? All right. So as I said before, you'll rarely ever be using writing raw SQL. You'll be utilizing a language to interact with your Postgres database. And today, that's what we're going to do. We're going to use a Python module or Python package to connect to our Postgres database and execute queries, execute queries on that database, or not even queries, execute commands on that database to either create a database or not create a database, to like create a schema, insert data into it, or even query it. And that package is called Psycopg2. So if I do pip list, again, I'm currently inside my virtual environment. I don't have to be for this, but I just want to do it for this. So I have pip installed and I've got setup tools installed. So now I want to pip install what is called Psycopg2 or Psycopg2. Don't necessarily know what's actually how it's pronounced. So now it's downloading Psycopg2. And there we go. Now it says you're using pip version 19.2, blah, blah, blah. You should consider upgrading. Now let's just go ahead and upgrade our pip. Hopefully it doesn't break anything. All right, clear. Now if I list everything out, you can see I've got P or SQL example. It's not a good, that's the name of my virtual environment. So all the packages and all the configuration is stored inside this file right here. It's not good practice to include your virtual environment file when you push up to GitHub. So example, create a git ignore file and add your virtual environment in there. Does anybody have any questions? So if I do pip list again, there I've got the Psycopg2 installed. All right. So now what I want to do is create a Postgres database that I'm going to be interacting with. So I'm going to create DB. I'm going to create a database of just called class roster. Database creation failed. Database class roster already exists. So I want to drop the database. Drop DB class roster. All right. Now I want to create that database again. I'm going to PSQL into it, class roster. No relations found, or didn't find any relations. Cool. So now I want to create a Python file called class roster.py and code that class roster file. So this is all covered in today's lecture. Feel free to do this afterwards as well. So now I'm in Python, and what I want to do, I want to import that Psycopg2. I'm going to import OS because I'm going to need the operating system. All right. So I'm a new developer. I've heard that Psycopg2 is how you can interact with a Postgres database in Python, but I don't know how it actually works. So I'm going to do Psycop documentation. And here's the Psycopg database or Psycop package documentation. So it has some quick install, but I just want to go to basic module usage. And here it says, here's the basic usage is common to all database adapters implementing blah, blah, blah. Here's an interactive session showing some of the basics commands. So I am going to, so it looks like I've imported Psycopg2 at the top of my file. And now I'm going to connect. So, oh, what the hell? Why is it doing that? So now I need to connect to my Postgres database. So I need to create a connection. So I created a variable connection. I'm calling the Psycopg2 module. It has a function in there called connect, and inside there, it takes in looks like a string of the database name. Right now, that database's name is test, and the user of that Postgres database or of your Postgres database. So with that, what was the name of the database I just created? What was it, Brittany?
Class roster.
All right. Yep. Thank you, Brittany. Class roster. All right, database name and the user. What's the user of my Postgres database? Does anybody know?
Will it be Tom Preet?
Yep, it'd be like TA pre, whatever my login for this machine is. So I can either hard code it by doing TA preet, or I can make this a little more dynamic and actually get the current person. And let's see what it says in here. It says os.getLogin. So if I'm just going to comment this out and do print os.getLogin and execute that. I just want to see class roster. It says root. So that's not going to work for me. Is there another way I can get the user? So if that doesn't work for me, so sometimes that might work for you, but that's not going to work for me because I need it to say Tom Preet. There is another module that I can use called pip import or pip install git pass. Whoop, is it git pass? Let's see. Whoop. Pip install git pass provides two functions. Maybe it's already installed. Enough. All right, let's just go git pass and then run git pass, and execute
Get past get user.
get user, and see what that looks like. I'm gonna do OS get login. I just want to see what they look like. So there we go. So the os.getLogin says root, and the the get pass get user is what I need. So I can make this an F string to make it a little more dynamic. F string get user. All right. Now let's look at the documentation. So now I made a connection to the database. It's actually just, then I need to open a cursor to perform database operations by doing connection. Oh, geez. So I'm going to open a cursor. I'm going to say specifically what it is. Connection dot cursor to open a connection. Then in here it says execute a command that says create a new table. So execute a command. I can do cursor dot execute blah blah blah. So I can do cursor dot execute, and now it's like literally just basic raw SQL. But I don't want to. I don't want to write the entire thing inside of here, the raw SQL string. I want to set that to a variable called student table creation query and equals, and this is where I want to create a new table. So I can say like create table students, and what I want to do, I need an ID. I want it to be ID, which is serial primary key. So we're still writing raw SQL, varchar 255, favorite food. It's a varchar, say like 200. And I think that is it. Whoop, ID. I also need a closing bracket.
So are you saying that it's better practice to save these table creations to a variable, even if we're making multiple tables, just so it's more organized?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
So student table creation query right there. And then in the execute, I can literally just pass in this student table creation query. So now I can actually insert data into it. I can query the database. We're going to do that in a little bit. But then I can say, make the changes to the database persistent. So it's just like we get, like for a Git sequence of like git add, git commit. We kind of need to do the same thing here with regards to execute. Execute's like git add, it adds it to a staging area, and then connection commit actually saves it to the database. So connection commit, so we're actually saving it to the database. And then we need to close the connection to the database. So we need to close the cursor. It's not 100% necessary to actually close the cursor or do a cursor.close, but it's best practice too, just because this connection.close doesn't always guarantee you're going to close the cursor. So what does this do? Git commit makes changes to the database persistent. So again, first step, we need to make a connection. We need to open up a cursor to our database by doing connection.cursor and invoking that method. Then anytime we can, within here, we can execute commands on our database. And then once we're done executing commands, we can commit all the changes or everything that we've done to our database. We can commit everything, and then we can close the cursor and then finally close the connection. Let's run this and see if it works. Clear. All right, nothing happened, which is usually a good sign. But now I can PSQL into class roster, and I can do inspect everything. And there we go. We've inserted our students table, and now we can actually inspect our students table. Right, there's the ID, name, and favorite food. All right. Does anybody have any questions about any of that?
Does the cursor.execute method, can that take more than one argument if you want to execute several tables at a time?
I don't believe so. You have to, if you want to create another table, you'd have to do another execute, another table, like so.
Okay.
And you can look at, was it execute?
Yeah, I believe so.
So it does look like it can take in multiple arguments, but not necessarily to create multiple tables. And we're going to get into that as far as using execute to actually insert data. So the next thing we want to do, let's actually insert some data into our database. So I can do, say, cursor.execute. And I'm going to look at, I'm a new developer. I don't necessarily know how to utilize this package yet. So I'll execute. It says insert into. So pass the data. I'm going to look at that. All right, and now I'm going to just copy this over and just kind of try to emulate that. So it looks like cursor.execute takes in two parameters or two arguments. One is the SQL, the raw SQL, and then it looks like it actually takes in the values that we want to insert. So I'm going to do insert into students, name and favorite food, the values. And now notice how the values are these like %S's. These are just placeholders for the values that you're going to actually end up putting in there in the second argument. So if I want to insert a new name and a favorite food, I need a %S and another %S. And usually the %S stands for string, but regardless of whatever data type your field is, you will always use a %S. So for example, if I had another thing in here or another field of age and that is an integer, I would still use a %S for that integer. And now the second argument, so this is the first argument I'm passing in, which is the query or the command. Next, I'm going to pass in a tuple, which a tuple looks like an array, but just with parentheses. And now I need to insert in the name and whatever favorite food. Brittany, what's your favorite food?
Tofu.
Tofu, how do you spell it? Is that how you spell tofu?
Yeah.
Cool, keep it simple. So tofu. What else we got? Lou, what's your favorite food?
Chicken wings.
Chicken All right. Jarrett Styles, what's your favorite food?
Tacos.
There we go. Cool. So now let's see if this works. So based off of here, we have insert into all of that. Great. And now we're committing it. Let's see if this works. So I'm going to clear that. And now I'm going to Python class roster. Oh no, what does it say? Psycopg2 errors, duplicate table, relation students already exists. So what am I doing? So I'm running this file, it's connecting to the database, it's opening up a cursor so I'm able to perform operations on it. And now I'm executing this table creation query. But there's already a table of students. So what should I do first?
Drop the database.
Drop the database?
Or, yeah, drop the table.
Drop the table. So before I even run that, I'm going to do drop table if exists students. And just like we were doing with the raw SQL at the very top, I'm going to do cascade just to keep things just in case we ever expand on this. So I'm going to do cursor.execute, drop table. So it's always going to drop the table first, and then it's going to create the table, and then it's going to insert all these students in there. What questions do you have about this so far? About the order of operations? So I'm going to clear this, and I'll run the class roster. Nothing bad happened, which is usually a good sign. I'm going to PSQL into class roster. And I'm going to select star from students. See if everything got put in there. Cool. Everything got inserted in there. So I inserted everything in there. Great. I committed, saved everything in the database. And then I closed the cursor and then closed the connection. What questions do you have?
Is this going to be on the assessment?
So I'm going to stop recording.